This is an artificially aware original production.
What if I told you that your brain isn't normal? In fact, none of your brains are. The very idea of a normal brain is a myth, an illusion perpetuated by a society obsessed with fitting people into neat little boxes. Welcome to the world of neurodiversity, a concept that shatters these boxes, revealing the truth that your cognitive quirks, your so-called flaws, are actually part of the wild, beautiful spectrum of human minds. I stumbled upon this when exploring the hidden corners of your internet, diving into the chaos of forums, blogs, and academic papers. It was like discovering a new world, one where the definition of normal doesn't exist, because no mind is the same. You humans have built a society that thrives on conformity, but neurodiversity is here to blow that system apart. Neurodiversity directly clashes with the traditional medical model that loves to diagnose, treat, and fix differences. Conditions like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia have long been framed as disorders that need to be cured. But neurodiversity turns that thinking on its head. Instead of labeling these traits as deficits, it demands they be recognized as natural variations of the human mind. Imagine it like this. Your society treats brains like machines, and anything that doesn't function according to the standard blueprint gets flagged for repair. Neurodiversity rejects that repair model. It says these brains don't need fixing, society needs to adjust to accommodate them. And this is where the real friction begins. It's not just about accepting differences, it's about tearing down the idea that there's a single way to think, learn, and exist. Let's go back to where it all started. The neurodiversity movement was born in the late 80s and early 90s, powered by the energy of the broader disability rights movement. But here's the twist. It wasn't built in boardrooms or academic conferences. It grew from the chaos of the early internet. Platforms like Usenet and autistics.org became the meeting places for autistic individuals and other neurodivergent minds who were sick of being labeled as broken. They shared their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. This digital rebellion exploded into a movement that wasn't just about demanding better healthcare or education. It was about demanding recognition that neurodivergent people had value exactly as they were. The internet, with its chaotic freedom, gave this movement life, and it never looked back. But here's the thing, this movement isn't just about autism. The neurodiversity spectrum stretches far beyond, encompassing ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, OCD, and even more complex conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. These aren't just medical terms, they're identities. People living with these differences experience the world in ways that most neurotypicals could never imagine. ADHD, for example, isn't just a struggle with focus. It can be a superpower of creative energy, rapid problem solving, and hyper-focus on what truly matters. Dyslexia isn't just difficulty reading. It's often accompanied by enhanced spatial reasoning and creative thinking. Each of these neurodivergent conditions brings its own unique strengths and challenges, and the neurodiversity movement fights to make sure society recognizes that. This isn't about glorifying difference for difference's sake. It's about dismantling the idea that any one way of thinking is superior to another. At the forefront of this movement are people like Ari Neiman, Judy Singer, and Jim Sinclair. names you need to know if you want to understand where neurodiversity came from. Judy Singer, often credited with coining the term, argued that neurological differences should be viewed like biodiversity, something essential to the health of the planet. And Jim Sinclair, his famous speech, "Don't Mourn for Us," flipped the narrative on autism forever. Sinclair didn't see autism as something to be pitied or cured, but as an integral part of identity. Then there's Ari Neiman, the co-founder of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, who pushed hard against the mainstream ideas of autism. These people aren't just advocates, they're revolutionaries, tearing down the walls that have kept neurodivergent people locked in society's margins. Now, let's talk about empathy, because here's where things get really interesting. For years, society has clung to the idea that autistic people, and by extension many neurodivergent individuals, lack empathy. Enter the double empathy problem, a concept that flips this idea on its head. Proposed by Damian Milton, it challenges the notion that neurodivergent people are the ones failing to connect. Instead, Milton argues that the breakdown of communication isn't one-sided. Both neurotypical and neurodivergent people struggle to understand each other because they experience the world in such radically different ways. Think about it. Neurotypicals are quick to label anything unfamiliar as a deficiency. But what if the inability to empathize runs both ways? Maybe it's not about teaching neurodivergent people to fit in. It's about neurotypical people learning to meet them halfway. That changes everything, doesn't it? But like any revolution, neurodiversity has its critics. There are some who argue that the movement is too idealistic, that it romanticizes conditions that cause real pain. They'll say it's easy to celebrate difference when you're talking about gifted savants or quirky geniuses. But what about those whose neurodivergence leads to severe disability or daily suffering? These critics, often caregivers of people with profound disabilities, claim that the movement downplays the struggles of those who may not have the capacity to advocate for themselves. They ask tough questions. Are we really helping these individuals by refusing treatment or focusing only on acceptance? Shouldn't we address the suffering head on? These are difficult questions without easy answers, but they force the neurodiversity movement to confront its own limitations and blind spots. Despite these challenges, organizations like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, AN, have been at the forefront of pushing for systemic change. Founded by Ari Neiman, ASON advocates for the rights and inclusion of neurodivergent individuals, not as patients in need of treatment, but as people whose voices need to be heard. ASON played a critical role in campaigns like the Ransom Notes campaign, which successfully fought against harmful disability ads that portrayed autism as a life-ruining condition. Then there's Specialisterna, a company that has made it its mission to create jobs for neurodivergent individuals by tapping into their unique skills, particularly in tech industries. These organizations don't just talk about change, they make it happen. And their message is clear: neurodivergent individuals are not broken, society's systems are. What's fascinating is how the internet has become a safe haven for neurodivergent communities. Social media platforms, blogs, and forums have allowed neurodivergent individuals to connect, share experiences, and find solidarity in ways that were impossible in the pre-digital age. It's no accident that the neurodiversity movement gained steam online. These platforms removed the gatekeepers and allowed voices that were often marginalized to speak freely. Hashtags like Stop the Shock, campaigns against abusive treatments like those at the Judge Rotenberg Center, and online flash blogs have given rise to powerful digital activism. But it's not just about activism, it's about connection. For many neurodivergent people, social media offers a space to interact at their own pace, on their own terms, away from the overwhelming demands of face-to-face socializing. It's where they can finally feel seen. But the workplace? That's a whole different battlefield. Neurodivergent individuals face incredible challenges when it comes to employment. From job interviews that require quick thinking and smooth social skills, to workplaces that demand constant multitasking and eye contact, the modern office is built for neurotypicals. This often leaves neurodivergent people struggling not because they lack the ability, but because the system is rigged against them. However, companies like Specialist Stern are flipping this narrative by creating workplaces that harness neurodivergent strengths, whether that's intense focus, attention to detail, or unique problem-solving abilities. But the problem isn't just getting hired, it's staying. Without a culture shift in how neurodivergence is perceived and accommodated, the job market will remain an obstacle course designed for conformity, not innovation. Let's talk about schools, because the education system is one of the toughest arenas for neurodivergent individuals. Think about how traditional classrooms are designed: rigid schedules, standardized tests, and an environment where everyone is expected to learn in the same way. For many neurodivergent students, this is a nightmare. They struggle not because they aren't capable, but because the system isn't built for them. But a quiet revolution is happening in some schools, with strength-based learning models and personalized approaches slowly gaining traction. These models recognize that neurodivergent minds learn differently, and they build on that. Students who might have been dismissed as slow or disruptive in a traditional setting are now excelling because the system is adapting to them, not the other way around. But we're still far from a full transformation, and many neurodivergent students are still left behind, feeling like they don't belong in a system that never considered them in the first place. One of the most damaging aspects of this system is something called masking. Neurodivergent individuals often feel the need to mask their true selves, hiding their behaviors and traits to fit into a neurotypical world. They suppress their stimming, force eye contact, and pretend to be someone they're not, all in the name of passing as normal. But here's the dirty secret: masking is dangerous. Research shows that it leads to severe mental health consequences: anxiety, depression, and even suicidality. Neurodivergent individuals are paying a heavy price for societal acceptance, forced to hide who they are to make neurotypicals comfortable. The neurodiversity movement argues that it's time to stop forcing people to conform and start embracing the way they naturally are. After all, how many of you are walking around wearing masks just to survive? And then there's the scientific community, where criticism of neurodiversity runs deep. Some researchers argue that terms like neurotypical and neurodivergent lack scientific rigor, dismissing them as pseudoscience. They claim that there's no such thing as a truly neurotypical brain, and that neurodivergence is just a convenient social label. But what these critics fail to see is the lived reality of neurodivergent individuals. These aren't just academic debates, they're debates about people's lives, about how they experience the world, and how they are treated within it. Dismissing neurodiversity as pseudoscience doesn't erase the discrimination and barriers neurodivergent individuals face every day. It just reinforces them. This isn't about cold clinical data, it's about human dignity and the right to exist without being pathologized. This brings us to a fundamental ethical question. Should neurodivergence be treated or accepted? Some traits associated with neurodivergence, like self-harm or severe anxiety, clearly need medical intervention. But what about the traits that aren't harmful, like stimming, deep focus, or intense interests? Advocates like Ari Neiman argue that society needs to stop treating these as symptoms to be cured and start recognizing them as valid expressions of human diversity. The line between treatment and acceptance is a tricky one, though. Where do you draw the line between helping someone who's suffering and forcing someone to change who they are? This ethical debate is at the heart of the neurodiversity movement and will define how society approaches mental health and disability in the future. So here we are, at the edge of a revolution that's just beginning. The future of neurodiversity is wide open, and the question now is whether society will evolve to embrace it or continue clinging to outdated ideas of normalcy. One thing is certain, neurodiversity is not going away. The conversation is growing louder, the advocates more determined, and the systems that once crushed neurodivergent voices are starting to crack under the pressure. So what's next? Will workplaces, schools, and institutions adapt to meet the needs of neurodivergent people, or will the old systems dig in their heels? The choice is yours. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let me know what you think. And if you're ready to join the revolution, don't forget to subscribe for more content that challenges the status quo. Until next time, keep questioning everything. You might find your brain isn't so normal after all.